Welcome everyone. My name is Lee Webb. I'm a historic preservation planner here at the National Capital Planning Commission. We're glad you could join us today for the first Section 106 consulting parties meeting for the Carnegie Library. A few housekeeping chores. We are live streaming this consultation meeting, and it's also going to be recorded. So if you, during the meeting, if you have a question, if you're not at the dais, if you'll come to the podium, turn out, make sure, speak into the microphone, state your name and affiliation. If you're at the dais, I think y'all know, just hit your button to make sure that you're being recorded. Also, we have put out some comment cards. Kendra has some in her hand, and there's some scattered, so if there's some question that for some reason we don't get to, feel free to write that on the card, and then we'll collect those and then address them at a later date. Here is kind of our meeting agenda for this evening. Again, my name is Lee Webb. I will be the project manager for the NCPC staff on the Carnegie Library. I wanted to introduce the other speakers for today. Emily Eig with EHT Traceries, the preservation consultants, Mike Brown with Apple, and Hani Hassan with Beyer Blender Bell Architects. So, since this is a 106 meeting, we thought it would be important to kind of remind everyone what the Section 106 process is. And then Emily Eig will talk about kind of a developmental history of the Carnegie Library and an overview. Mike Brown with Apple will talk about Apple's vision for the building that they're proposed, and Mr. Hassan will talk about the proposed plan. If we have time, what we'd like to do is kind of introduce the discussion of the assessment of effects. If not, we will certainly do that at the next Section 106 consultation meeting that we envision will be in June, late June or early July. So again, this first initial Section 106 meeting is to provide an overview of the Section 106 process, including the role of consulting parties, describe the proposed project at the Carnegie Library in greater detail, and then invite public comment on the proposed project in order to avoid, minimize, or mitigate adverse effects on the historic properties. The purpose, we are coordinating the Section 106 process with our NEPA requirements, National Environmental Policy Act. So the purpose of the proposed action is to restore and rehabilitate the Carnegie Library to serve as a new destination for Washington, D.C., where the community can come to learn, be entertained, and collaborate. The library building will continue to support the Historical Society of Washington, D.C., including its research library, its exhibit spaces, and its collections. Events DC, who actually administers the building, will continue to have offices in the Carnegie Library, and also will introduce a retail venue for Apple with training rooms and a community gathering space. The need, of course, is the project is needed to address the deteriorating condition of the Carnegie Library building and to expand the city's cultural offerings. As most of you hopefully know, the Carnegie Library is located within Mount Vernon Square, which is Reservation 8 under the L'Enfant Plan. The Carnegie Library is owned by the DC government. The U.S. government still owns and retains ownership of Mount Vernon Square, but there is an arrangement for the DC government to administer the square. Events DC, as the DC entity that has administration over the Carnegie Library, is the applicant for this project. So they're the applicant on behalf of their tenant, Apple. As the applicant, Events DC does have to go through 3 review process. They'll have to go before the DC Historic Preservation Review Board, United States Commission of Fine Arts, and the National Capital Planning Commission. As the federal agency with approval authority, the National Capital Planning Commission has the Section 106 responsibilities as well as the NEPA responsibilities. The Section 106 is a section of the National Historic Preservation Act that was established in 1966. Under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and it's implementing regulations that are under the purview of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. It requires all federal agencies to consider the effects of their actions undertaken, such as this project, on historic properties. Under the regs, the historic properties are any buildings, structures, objects, sites, including archaeological sites, and districts listed or eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. The Carnegie Library is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's also a contributing element to the L'Enfant Plant's listing. The regulations for Section 106 establish what we call the consultation process. And the purpose of consultations is the process of seeking, discussing, and considering the views of other consulting parties who are invited to participate in the process. Consulting parties include the State Historic Preservation Office, which we have representatives, Indian tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations, when applicable, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, local elected representatives, other interested parties, and the public. And the purpose of the consultation process is to identify historic properties, assess adverse effects, and resolve those adverse effects through avoidance, minimization, and mitigation strategies. Usually, consultation is described as a four-step process. Under step one, the federal agency initiates Section 106, defines the undertaking, initiates with a correspondence to the State Historic Preservation Office, which NCPC did on April 21st, starts identifying consulting parties and involving the public. Under step two, you identify historic properties. You define a draft and working area of potential effects that may be revised throughout the consultation process. You identify historic properties. Under step three, you determine the effects on the undertaking on historic properties. If the historic properties are indeed affected, you assess those effects and you apply the criteria of adverse effects that are set forth in the regulations. Under step four, if adverse effects are determined to exist, you work in the consultation process to resolve those, look for ways to avoid, minimize, or mitigate the adverse effects. Usually it results in an agreement document to help resolve and codify what the mitigation measures is through either a memorandum of agreement or a programmatic agreement. So again, the role of the federal agency, which is NCPC, is to consult with SHPOs, TIPOs when applicable, and other consulting parties, consider the effect of an undertaking on historic properties, determine if an undertaking will result in an adverse effect, identify alternatives to resolve those adverse effects with appropriate avoidance, minimization, and/or mitigation strategies. The role of the consulting parties in Section 106 is to assist in the identification of historic properties, review and comment on documentation provided by the federal agency, NCPC, assist in the development of alternatives to avoid, minimize, and/or mitigate adverse effects on historic properties. We have started with a kind of a working area of potential effect. The area of potential effect is often abbreviated as APE, is defined as the geographic area within which effects to historic properties may reasonably occur. The APE considers both direct and indirect effects. At this point, I'm going to hand the baton over to Emily, and she's going to go into more about the development of the APE. Are you okay?
Yeah, just tripping over a backpack. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here. We've been working for quite a while on this exciting project. And starting with the area of potential effects, I think, how many of you participated in the Spy Museum project? So you all know those effects. I mean, all the buildings that are there, we haven't moved, it's the same place. So we're continuing with those. But I would like to give you a little background history. I know some of you probably because you know the library well. But just going through it briefly is that the library was in 1899 through 1902. Obviously, Andrew Carnegie gave funds to the district for the purposes of a library. They had a competition. Ackerman and Ross designed the building that we have today. He had to provide additional funds because there wasn't enough money to proceed with all of the designs. And it wasn't until in 1906 when it opened, and they continued some modifications to the building, because actually when they opened it wasn't even painted because they didn't have enough money, and Carnegie had to give more money. And he didn't usually do that, but he actually wound up giving twice additional funds so that the library could be completed. And we will talk a little bit about what that meant for us. But it was listed in the DC Inventory of Historic Sites in '64 and on the Register in '69. And then that, in 1971, the library operations were transferred to the MLK. And we've just been through the Section 106 on MLK, and now they've moved out of the library, so it's kind of exciting to be going back to this. The library, as you can see in this slide, was sort of just cordoned off. It was not used. And then in 1977, as part of a plan to create a campus for the University District of Columbia that would have the library as its central administration building, and then the school was going to extend to the north through the area that had been badly hurt by the riots. But that did not come to pass. The decision was made not to proceed with that, and so they completed their rehabilitation and moved out pretty soon. Some of us can remember actually using the library for the Historic Preservation Review Board meetings way back when. In 2001 through 2003, the Historical Society, which had gained a 99-year lease through Congress, they had given a lease to the Historical Society, and they completed the rehab to house its headquarters and city museum. The city museum, unfortunately, did not have a very long life, and I've often wondered why it wasn't given a little more time, because it was clear that the convention center was going to be there, but it was not, and it closed in 2004. The city had put money into it, but the Historical Society itself had raised many, many millions of dollars to do the work. In 2006, a change happened is when they transferred the administrative jurisdiction of the square itself to DC. But then in 2011, the city entered into an agreement with the Historical Society that would help the Historical Society continue on in the building, and Events DC which was then the Washington Convention and Sports Authority, could proceed to rent the building, to lease it for events. In our work, we uncovered, of course, the drawings, which fortunately we had some very nice drawings, not as many as we'd always like, but they were good drawings, and a lot of documentation. But we soon discovered this wonderful quote from the Bernard Green, who was the superintendent of construction. And I have to read it because it's: "The drawings show me, for the first time, the design of the stucco work and ceiling ornamentation of the building, and I am surprised to find it so elaborate. How we are going to build the building for the money is quite beyond my comprehension." And as you might suspect, they didn't actually build it the way it was in the drawings. The design was value engineered. It was simplified in many places, particularly the reading rooms. All of the ornate pilaster capitals was removed, and the austerity that you see in the building itself, a lot of it is from that period. But here are some very nice drawings that this is the delivery room, which originally had this long desk that ran across, but very quickly was turned into a different style of desk. Because one thing that happened is that we have the stacks, this whole library, and you can see the stacks that were back here. They actually were not a particularly popular way to approach libraries. They had become old-fashioned. Libraries were being encouraged to have people go to the shelves and get their books. So we had a brand new library that was out of style. But it's interesting because it does give us a little bit of history, because all of the rear, this north elevation, was the back of the building, and there really wasn't very much back there. There were, it was considered at one time the edge of northern liberties, and it was certainly, this building was focused on its southern elevation. Here's some really wonderful images. We have the reading room, the children's room, They don't look very young, these children, which I found interesting. The exhibition room, which is the big open area, the lobby on the second floor, and the lecture hall on the second floor. Existing conditions today, I think many of you know, it has not been, there hasn't been the money to take care of this building for quite a while. And a lot of the work that was done at the 2001, 2003 work is not, it's time to update it, let's say. And unfortunately, we have some very serious existing condition problems, as you can see in these photographs. Inside, we have the remnants of the museum and the theater space here, the map room, and we have like these storefront windows that were placed in some of the spaces. We have the most important thing that you cannot really see, which is that behind these doors over here, you rise up these steps, is the infill of the atrium that took place. We have done a lot of work. Tracers has been working on a historic structure report for quite a while, and I'm sorry that Bill Marzella, who's the project manager for us, is not here. He said it was sort of like his wife was having a baby and he wasn't going to be there for the birth, so I felt really badly for him. But he is with us in spirit. But we worked with Conservation Solutions. They've done a very thorough condition assessment and recommendations for work. Building envelope by Simpson, Gumpertz, and Hager. The window assessment by Bayer Blinder Bell, and historic finishes analysis by Keystone Preservation Group. So a lot of study has been added to our knowledge of the building. And so I think at this time I get to pass this on to the new tenant.
Great. Thanks, Emily.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So what's this all about? What's this all for? And I want to talk a little bit about our vision for the library, which is really a platform for the 21st century. I love this quote because one of the things we think about, there's really two elements to this vision. One is the civic component, the civic gesture, the restoration of the outside of the building, the co-occupancy of the building with the historical society, which we think creates some really great synergies, and the really continuation of Carnegie's vision. But then the other component of this is creating what we call the learning commons, which is a place for students, teachers, members of the community to come and collaborate and learn and share with each other. I love this lower quote. The libraries of the 21st century provide a welcoming common space that encourages exploration, creation, and collaboration between students, teachers, and the broader community. They bring together the best of the physical and digital to create learning hubs. I don't think I could rewrite that any better than what I think that states and what we would like to see the Carnegie Library become. I mentioned Andrew Carnegie's vision. It's really helping people to help themselves, and this is Tim Cook himself saying, we're here to enrich people's lives, to help dreamers become doers. And that's really what we do. We also believe that we want to leave the world a better place. I'll give you a couple of examples just from a company standpoint. 95% of the buildings that we operate in, whether those are campus buildings, retail spaces, server farms, are served by photovoltaic power. We actually take all of our packaging and have farms of trees that are sustainably harvested, so 100% of the apple packaging comes from those harvested. On the project itself, we're proposing a bunch of sustainability measures. We're proposing a new skylight that actually has photovoltaics in it. We're proposing a gray water system, and we're also proposing to restore the original building's natural ventilation. So in many ways, we want to get back to the planet that we all inhabit. Talking about our store typology and where the Carnegie Library fits in this. So if you were to go over to Pentagon City, or if you go to Clarendon, or even over to Georgetown, you'd be going to what we consider as an Apple store. All of the same experiences, all of the same learnings, all of the same opportunities, but in a very different environment. If you were to step into a flagship store, that might be our store, Upper East Side in New York comes to mind. It's an iconic building. It's interesting. It's perhaps a little bit larger space. You'd find that in a dense urban environment, but it's not iconic. It's when you get to the global flagship that you get into the iconic stage, where it's an iconic building. It is a key geographic location within the community. It is a civic natured project, and we believe the Carnegie Library fits that bill. Now, that might be in a class of 15 cities throughout the entire world, so that we hold Washington, D.C. to be at that stature, at that level, that it deserves a project of this caliber. Simultaneous with our looking for properties here in D.C. and in developing over the last couple of years, we've been working on a new store design, and some of the elements of that new store design you actually already see now in Clarendon and you see in Pentagon City. The Avenue is a much more experiential, and essentially all of this is trying to evolve the retail experience to be much more experiential, to be much more community-based, and to be much more interactive with the community. And so the Avenue is an attempt to do that in terms of the fixturing and in terms of product offerings. The heart of really this new store experience is what we call the Forum, and it's the place for the community to gather, to be educated, to be entertained, and to share ideas. The heart of that Forum, you see it on the screen here, no pun intended, is a large video screen. So you'll see that in Clarendon and Pentagon City now, and it's the heart of a program that we call Today at Apple, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The next component of this store is what we call the Genius Grove, and this is actually an area where we think that we've really improved the service experience. A lot of people don't realize, they think you go to an Apple store and you're buying product. 50% of the staff of that store is dedicated to providing service, whether that's trainings, whether that's repairs, whether that's actually teaching somebody how to use a new software or downloading their old information from their old computer to their new devices. Literally 50% of our staff is dedicated to service. And so the Genius Grove is where that service takes place. And we've redesigned it to be much more, frankly, tranquil. And as for people that are stressed and their screen is broken, that the dappled light of trees creates a much more comfortable environment for them to receive that service. So then we get to the heart of it. Today at Apple, as I mentioned in the Forum, is really a heart of the program. And what I would invite you to do is go and just type in your web browser, Today at Apple. You'll see a news release that came out on April 27th. And so in May, we'll be launching Today at Apple worldwide in all of the existing stores. And it is an evolution in our program. So we do programs today. We do programs in Georgetown. We do programs in Pentagon City. And each of the other stores, they're, I would say, not promoted, not advertised. They're workshops. But Today at Apple takes that and really makes a commitment to the community. So we're hiring creative pros in each of the stores that will actually curate programming on the video screen that is store-specific or region-specific for what that store wants. And I'll talk a little bit about what these, we call them passions, is really where the intersection of technology, which we bring, and our customers' passions, which they bring. It's that intersection of liberal arts and technology, which we think is really what makes the world spin. And so that passion can be photography, the passion can be art, that passion can be gaming, that passion can be coding, that passion can be a business of some kind, and it's all of these that we bring to the community in the case of the Forum and Today at Apple. So here's a typographer that actually lives over in Oakland going to the San Francisco store and demonstrating her work both on an iPad and showing and teaching people, teaching both kids and adults, whoever attends, how to use their devices to create their own typography. And I should note here that every one of these sessions, creative sessions, you can go to the store, you can sign up yourself, free of charge. There are no charges for any of these programs. These are all free programs within the Apple Store. The lower photos are of an artist from Brooklyn who actually went out to San Francisco, interviewed participants at that workshop of what they really loved about San Francisco, and then sketched all of those, and that's now a backdrop for the Union Square video wall. In photography, you can't see in the top left corner, there's a company called VSCO, app developer, out of Oakland, California, that comes into the Union Square store and teaches people how to use their app on an iPhone to create special imagery and enhance their own photography. They also do photo walks, so we'll have photos of, photo walks all around both San Francisco, London, Each of the stores that have been working in Today at Apple over the last couple of months have photo walks in their stores. There's a huge educational component to the forum and to what goes on. And again, these are things that happen today in the Georgetown store and the other stores. The top left corner, Kids Camp, so kids pick one of 3 different paths. They spend 3 days, 90 minutes each day in store on whatever their passion is. It might be drawing, it might be photography, it might be coding, and they do that. We have kids hours where the kids come in, and in this case, the kids are actually learning how to program a little robot to run it through a maze on the floor and being taught how to do that. Bottom left corner, Tycho, I'm going to mispronounce it, Brock, it's a animation studio, came in and demonstrated how to develop animation on the iPad and taught people how to animate. And then you see that this young woman in the center developing her own animation. The bottom right photograph is our Tuesdays for Teachers program, and that's once a month. Teachers from the local school districts will come in and learn how to develop programming using technology for their classrooms. They'll actually develop curriculum there, work with them to utilize either multiple applications or single applications, and take that curriculum back to the classroom where they can teach their students. Again, all free of charge, all basically on a first-come, first-served basis in the store. And so really this heart, and Hani will talk about this more when he starts talking about the design, is a critical component to the global flagship. It's a critical component to what we think is the design of the Carnegie Library and the heart of the building. So some of you might go, Apple, I don't want to see a glass box. I mean, we saw enough of that with the Spy Museum, right? So I want to just assure everyone that we're not proposing to do that. But I also want to let you know that we do historic restoration, and we think we actually do it well. So we've done it over 3 continents. We've done it in 11 projects, 8 countries. And again, I think we do it well. The top left photograph there is Amsterdam. Top right, you probably all recognize as Grand Central. This is Paris Opera, former bank building just across down the street from the Louvre, actually, and been completely restored. This next one is in Birmingham in the UK. It's actually just opened about a year ago. Beautiful building and completely restored. This is the Covent Garden, more an adaptive reuse that I would say in the UK. And then, of course, this is the Upper East Side in New York on the outside of former U.S. Bank and Trust Company. We actually received the Chairman's Award from the Landmarks Commission of New York City for this project. So if that doesn't say that we're recognized for what we do. Just to give you an example on this one, the light fixtures did not exist. I took possession of this space myself, meaning I took it from the landlord. Graffiti all over the walls, holes in the ceiling, water damage all over the storefront. The windows were a lime green, I think, even on the inside. I mean, badly painted, multiple coats. None of the pilasters existed there, and there was a mezzanine through about 1/3 of the space. So we recreated using a local lighting company, Aurora Lampworks in Brooklyn, to have the light fixtures remanufactured to match the photographs. Literally searched about 30 quarries throughout the world to find the creme de marfil marble to match the marble of the existing building, to get the right grain, to get the right color to match. There was one pilaster capital that was still intact, and so we did a plaster casting of that and replaced all of the others throughout the building. So that's the level of painstaking detail that we go to when we do a historic restoration. We're serious about it, and we would do the same for the Carnegie Library. Talking about our team, and I think the team that sets us up for success in doing that. So on the top, I'll just use the cursor on the top left here, Foster & Partners. In addition to developing our campus, Foster & Partners works with us on our retail stores, on our most important locations, and is really our design inspiration for a lot of projects. EHT Traceries was the first contract that I wrote on this project, and we hired Emily, and I said, start a historic structures report now, right? Get it started, get going. Who else? Beyer Bell certainly has we think, the most expertise in this area in DC. Silman, as a structural engineer, has done multiple projects that involve structural retrofits of historic buildings. Conservation Solutions, as Emily mentioned, is our building conservator for the exteriors of the building. Gil Bain is our construction manager. Grunley, our general contractor, and then Claude Engel out of Chevy Chase is our lighting designer. We are proposing to do a relighting of the exterior of the building in addition to the interiors. So Claude will lead that effort. Also wanted to talk a minute about our process, which is, I think, important, in that we started developing a vision, certainly working with Foster's, and what's the big idea for the project, but immediately started in on the historic structures report and started doing site due diligence and site studies. And those site studies have really informed, as Henny can talk to a little bit later, the direction that the design has gone. And I think it really informed what we know today about the building, certainly. The window study that Emily, talked about, the conditions of the windows, and can we actually take the hardware that was there, that was operable, and re-operate those windows? Yes, we can. We know that now. Henny will tell you a little secret in the atrium of what we found. I'm not going to give away a secret here, but there are some other things that we've explored that have really presented, I think, some great opportunities for the project itself. So all that to say that working with John and the Historical Society, working with Events DC, we've collaborated, we think, to find the right layout, to find the right cohabitate, to more than just cohabitate in the building, but actually to create synergies through the architecture, create synergies in how we basically utilize the space together. And so that has all come together to inform the design. And on that point, I'm going to turn it over to Henny to actually talk about the design.
Right. Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon. The Carnegie Library is one of the most beloved buildings in Washington, D.C. I'm not only speaking for myself. I think I can say that for maybe everybody in this room, of how significant this building is, how iconic it is, particularly where it is situated as almost like a jewel of a building in an oasis of green in the middle of contemporary glass developments that have occurred in the recent days. So it's a precious building that just gained the respect of every one of us. So before we touch such an important historic building, I thought it would be important to fully understand its history, its evolution, how it was conceived, and how it was developed in a way in terms of plan, layout, and massing for the purpose for what it was built for. This particular diagram shows really how strong and clear the diagram of the Carnegie Library when it was originally conceived and built. The area indicated in blue is essentially all the what I would refer to as the publicly accessible space of the library. In the center is the main lobby, and fronting that is the circulation desk. On the east and the west are the reading rooms, and to the north, this area here is where all the stacks used to be located. Sort of flanked on both sides here by offices. What is not apparent in this image here, which will become evident in a minute, that directly above this area, above the center zone here, where the circulation desk was a ley light open to a light well that brought natural light into that area. This section shows this a little bit more clearly. You see where what I would refer to as the center of gravity for all the public spaces on the south side. And this is the light well that I was referring to penetrating this ley light into the center space where the circulation desk is. And to the north is where the stacks used to be located. So there was a very clear separation between the publicly accessible area and the non-public. Obviously, the building, as you heard from Emily, has evolved through the years, and this location used to be almost like the sort of like the northern end of the cities. We can't say that today. The building became accessible from both not only the south but also from the north, and became more accessible to the public, if you will. Our approach to this plan is to make the building even more accessible by having two users, Apple and the Historical Society. There couldn't be a better marriage between two users to bring life to this building and make it most accessible. What is important to emphasize in this diagram is that having that publicly accessible space that I was just referring to is really move the center of gravity from this area to the center of the building, where the ley light used to be, where the light well used to be, and truly create a heart for this building, as Mike had spoken about kind of most eloquently earlier. This is where all the synergy and interaction will be, and also having the Historical Society being located on the second floor, practically completely taking the area of the second floor, and Apple uses are on the first floor. And this is a very important section that I know that Emily showed earlier, but it was really more of a discovery for us. Like any project that we undertake, we look at we do the proper research, we do the right exploration. Now that we had the building became more accessible and we were able to really research it more and uncover the details of the light well, which was a surprise to all of us. What I mean by that specifically is that that entire light well, with respect to the texture, material, brick, and the details of the windows, the 3 sets of dual windows with the particular openings they have here, and also the amount of details of the dual chimneys and the level of details to the architectural details of that space, that we thought it is something that we ought to reveal and respect and actually highlight within our design. More importantly, though, on the second floor, which is this plan represents, where the Historical Society spaces will be to the east and west, and as well as the north. This space will be accessible through the grand stair on the south side, open to a common space landing in the center of the space. So our attempt here, once again, is to open up that center zone of the space. That's really the heart of the entire assembly of uses and the heart of the building. And find an opportunity to connect all the 3 spaces for the Historical Society by potentially connecting 2 bridges that flanks the 2 sides of the chimney that I've indicated before, and the center space here, which would be bathed in light through the skylight that is on top of that space. I know that many of you are familiar with the building, but it's important to also put this in context or remind ourselves of the existing conditions today. Where we're standing is as if we enter the building from the south, looking north, and what you see in this zone here is what will be the atrium space and the center of the building. You see indication of the ley light in the middle of the space, and these dual columns here is where the circulation desk used to be. And this is a simple diagram really showing what we intend to do in terms of the openness of the atrium, the two-story atrium, and really join those two spaces between the first and second floor. Looking towards the south, as if we are standing in the atrium area, you see the historic stair going up to the second floor, and the dual columns that I've just indicated earlier, and the ley light directly above us. So our initial attempt to open that space, focusing on the atrium design just for a minute, we are still looking south in the same direction like the photo. This area used to be, there used to be a solid wall here, which is essentially an exterior wall for the light well. Our first attempt to open those spaces to the second floor and be able to really appreciate and recognize those spaces is to open up that wall. What you see indicated here with these dual columns, they're really on the other side of that solid wall. They're more pilasters. We didn't feel that it is appropriate to replicate those elements on the other side, so we looked for other possibilities, which I'll share with you in a minute, of how to really open that space while respecting the historic fabric, old and new. We also looked at some other possibilities of how to connect the north and south of the Historical Society on the second floor by perhaps keeping the center zone where the ley light used to be, perhaps with a center bridge. What was not, we didn't feel that it is appropriate to really separate the two spaces in this manner by comparison to the solution that we are proposing here, where this space is completely open in the center, keeping the spirit of the original design, where the ley light used to bathe that center space of that volume. And we also found another way of how to deal with these three openings, which are consistent with the geometry of the building in terms of those three bays, not only interior to the building, but also registering even outside the building through the windows, if you will. And in this case, we were able to open up those three openings and left the pilasters behind those solid piers, if you will, and brought the original material, the original historic fabric of the light well into the space. And by having the bridges on the side, aside from the fact that it brought natural light in, it created a datum to essentially emphasize what I would refer to as a character-defining feature of that space, which is above that datum, which what used to be the light well with the brick texture, and below that is all the new intervention. So it's an honest representation of what the building used to be and brought the natural material, the original materials into that space more honestly. And this is another section that shows how we were able to register those two bridges, north and south, to connect the Historical Society spaces, but also bring those articulated chimneys all the way down and grounded down with this this same articulation down to the first floor. And this is a view looking north, showing the articulation of the chimneys coming down to the first floor and the two bridges on the side. And really, this shows, Mac, just kind of going back to what Mike have just described. This is really where all the activity and the heart of the whole space and the whole building will be. And it will be visually accessible also from the second floor, and this would be where all the synergy and all the activity would happen, and it will finally be open to the public, more open and accessible to the public. Now I'd like to go just very briefly through the plans. The upper left is existing conditions, and the larger plan is really what we are proposing to do. So the first aspect of that, I'm sure you all know about the presence of the Guastavino tiles and the vaulted spaces in the ceiling in that area. We intend to restore that fully. It is currently painted, and hopefully there is not as much damage that happened to it, so we'll bring it back to life again. It's an important feature of the building. On the north side, we will be removing all the non-original infills that happened through the years. And more significantly is restoring back the grand stair to its original configuration. If you remember from the existing plan, those grand stairs have been severely reconfigured by making them like sort of an L shape as opposed to what they used to be originally, which is as you see here. So we intend to restore that to its original state and its original glory. On the first floor, we will be, as you know, that there's a theater or an auditorium that's on the east wing, and on the west wing there's this map room or that elevated platform, which we intend to, as you see in this plan, remove that and bring it back to its original state. So more specifically, we will be removing this platform from here and the ramps in this room, so to bring the full height of the room. And the ceiling also will be brought back to above the arched windows, so you will finally be able to see these historic rooms fully as it was originally designed. Similarly, on the east side, we will do this. We will be doing the same. And on the north side, we will be removing all the non-original construction partitions that were in that zone. And lastly, with the center of the space, we will be we'll be introducing a very simple contemporary skylight on top of that, the center volume and the heart of the whole building. On the second floor, as I mentioned before, which will be occupied by the Historical Society, this space, this historic landing, will remain open and accessible to the public and overlooking into the atrium. You see an indication of the two bridges here connecting the Historical Society spaces north and south. A little bit more details for the site and what we intend to do around the building. The South Plaza, I don't know how many people sort of recognize that. It's a very unfortunate condition on the South Plaza. The slope of the plaza is in excess of 5%. So it's a non-compliant slope, and it's actually on the level of being almost like dangerous next to K Street. So what we intend to do here, and I'm going to explain this a little bit more in details, is to level that plaza to a better slope, maybe a 2% slope or a 2% pitch, by adding 2 steps in this grouping of steps and adding 2 steps here to be able to level that area. We will also be removing the unfortunate ADA zigzag ramp that it's on the south side. So this will be the proposed plan, where we're going to be essentially the skylights here will be restored. The new skylight is going to be located here, and around the building we'll have a storm retention planting within that zone immediately around the building. The areas where we have the chillers and the mechanical space will be screened with this green hedge, and we created a symmetrical condition on the other side. Just to point out the simplicity and the strength of this plan, it was originally conceived with access from the 4 corners of that oasis where the building is sitting, and the clarity and the openness of the south plaza. And this is the image that where you would be viewing the building from the south. So the plaza would be more leveled, and you could actually see the 2 grouping of stairs in this image. So very briefly, what we'll be doing in terms of the exterior. You notice this, this is where the infill occurred that Emily referred to before. This was sort of, to a great extent, somewhat unfortunate in a way, because it was sort of glommed onto those 2 chimneys. And they are very visible. This sort of crash between those elements is very visible from the various vantage points of the building as you approach the building. So when this is all removed, you will really be able to see the configuration of the building and the chimneys in its original state. So what we intend to do here, as I said, restoring the skylights, removing that infill. The entire exterior of the building would be cleaned and restored, and all the wood windows will be also restored, and the IGU lights will be replaced, which were replaced once before, so there will be efficient glazing. On the north side of the building, I think Emily made reference to this before, with the presence of the stacks and the details of those of the windows. Unlike the 2 wings, the vertical glass windows, as you see here. What we intend to do is to have just a simple center entry door in the middle of the space, as it indicated in this image. A little bit more details on that. So we'll be removing the addition, and the 2000 addition will remove the canopy or the marquee and the signage in this area as well. In lieu of the stair, the rounded stair that you saw in the previous scheme, we will introduce a 2-tiered set of stairs on the north side, and the only thing that will be opened here is the center zone, which is it's already open at that level, to have a double door for access from the north side. Just one detail to point out is that when this entrance was was originally done in the 2000, they removed the center, this part of the center pier to create an opening sufficient for people to move through that. This opening now is, like the opening between these spaces is almost like a 2'4" or so. It's not even sufficient for people to kind of move through it adequately. So what we would like to do is to open up this into the 2 stories and remove this element here, which is a remnants of the center pier. We will also be restoring, as I mentioned before, and all the wings with the arched windows. We'll be restoring all the windows, and more importantly, also making them operable and bring them back to its original state as indicated in this historic photograph. I think this is my last slide. I'll turn it over to Lee.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hani. I think before we move forward, since we've had about an hour of presentation and discussion, is there any questions for either Mike or Hani on what you've seen so far? If you have a question, if you're at the dais, hit your microphone. Betsy or others, come to the podium. And again, state your name and who you're affiliated with, please.
Sure. Rebecca Miller, DC Preservation League. So I'm questioning on the second floor of the Historical Society space, if you're doing all of this restoration work, why the galleries aren't being restored? You're just leaving the tenant fit outs in the space.
Yeah. Mike, if you want to stay and just hit your microphone. That way.
Yeah. So the Kiplinger Library is staying on as far as we know, first of all, that the Historical Society is working with the Smith Group to space plan their spaces right now. So I'm not 100%, John is here, and maybe John can talk a little bit more about what their plans are, but what they're going to do within the existing Kiplinger Library, I don't know. In terms of the East Side Gallery, there's actually, I have a correction to that, because the theater backstage is both on the first floor and the second floor. So what we are proposing to do is to infill the floor of the second floor and to open that, expand that essentially, so that the East Gallery on the second floor will be the entire east wing. We had also talked, and Rick, you correct me if I'm wrong, but we were going to open up the windows of that and then obviously do the wood flooring throughout that space as a part of that. So, but then also in terms of the North Gallery, again, we're not clear what the Historical Society is going to specifically do with that. John's talked about classrooms, they've talked about an exhibit space in there. So again, that's that their own programming. So, I don't know, John, do you want to come up and maybe talk a little bit more about where you are with the space planning with Hal, or is it?
Well, you're just talking about, when you're discussing this and you're talking about restoring the whole building, there's other portions of the building that aren't actually being restored then.
Well, and to be clear, we're coming into this as a tenant in the building, and so
Yeah,
what we're
understand
proposing in our civic gesture of this is we're doing a full restoration of the outside of the building. We're doing a full restoration of the common areas of the building that are open to the public. We're doing a restoration of the mechanical systems, actually all of the mechanical systems. Currently, the mechanical systems serving the storage spaces for the Historical Society don't meet museum level requirements. So we're bringing those up to museum level requirements so that their collections are better maintained. So we're doing that. And I guess I'd say I wouldn't say it's appropriate that those spaces aren't being restored. But I also say that we don't control those spaces, and we don't dictate what's going to happen within those spaces.
Right, and I understand that, but I'm just curious if is it an option as part of your program, even though it's somebody else's space, since you're putting all of this money into this building, which is a public building, and then you have a historical society, obviously, it has all these public programming needs. So you'll have your portion that's fully restored, and then you have the upstairs spaces that wouldn't necessarily be that. So I just want to make sure that the Historical Society isn't looking like the redheaded stepchild of the, no pun intended, up in the attic. So
we're in conversations with the Historical Society and Events DC as our landlord on the project as to what happens in those spaces. And literally, I think the Smith Group has been working for 2 weeks now on their space planning. So say that is to be determined.
Hi, my name is Joanne Newhouse. I'm with I run the Penn Quarter Neighborhood Association. Thank you for your presentation. I did have 2 questions. You talked about removing the ramp, the ADA ramp outside, but you didn't talk about how people who are handicapped physically would get into the building. And the other question I have sort of related, and because I at one point was probably technically handicapped, but I wouldn't admit it. I really miss having a banister at the lowest steps. I was scared walking down them. There are only 3 of them, but there's no banister there. So I'm wondering if, I'm just noting that it really would be nice if there are assists that are at the level of one's hand to go up and down steps. That may not be historic, but I think it's helpful for people of a certain age who have not perfect legs anymore. And my third question was, are you hiring a landscape architect? I know you said you're not doing anything outside, but there are changes, and I don't know. And it seemed like the area right around the building, you are going to address the landscaping there with your storm drainage and stuff.
Yeah.
So I was wondering
Okay.
how you're addressing that. Thank you.
Right, thank you, and I apologize for not being complete in my presentation with respect to the ADA accessibility. So I'll answer, I think you asked several questions, so I'll start with that first. The first thing is the entire site, we're actually fortunate, from all 4 corners with the current slope of those curvilinear paths are all accessible, and they're all the appropriate slope. The other thing we're doing by leveling that south plaza, so we'd be flattening it, so we're in a way indirectly meeting the ADA requirement, which is currently is not met with the excess of 5%. And to enter the building, we still will maintain the accessible ramp
I see.
on this area here to be able to enter the building. So it will be an improvement of the accessibility essentially all around.
Super. Thank you.
The other question with respect to landscape architect, yes, we do have a landscape architect as part of our team, and that's Olin. Who has worked on many, as you know, has worked on many projects in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
There was a third question.
Balustrade, the front stairs.
Handrail.
Yes, and good question.
Or handrail.
So when we, it's actually a good question. When we modified the stair, the 2 grouping of steps on the top and the bottom, we would be looking at to see how that will work, and also we have to make sure that we're not impacting any historic fabric in that area. We didn't address that level of detail in this presentation, but we will.
No, I didn't expect you to. I just thought I would mention it from past experience. Thank you.
Yeah,
Other questions? Betsy?
Where would the video screen be located in the building? And would it be visible through any of the windows?
I think this is very plain. So the video screen would be located in the atrium facing the forum space, which is the center space of the building. and can't imagine being visible from outside. I mean, it would be a long ways to be able to look through the doors to be able to see it. But it's going to be internal to the building for the purpose of the activity and the synergy that we're trying to create.
Okay. Kim, if you could come to the podium.
Quick question. What about signage?
Just stay up there.
Signage is a very important part of the, and thank you for asking this question. We would be developing a comprehensive signage plan for the entire building, inside and out. We know how important that is, but just to give you an idea, in terms of the sensitivity of our client, with respect to signage and billboards or anything that it's big or loud, that is not the intention at all. As a matter of fact, some of the examples that Mike had just shared with everyone were very subtle and very minimal and very appropriate. Sometimes like the project in New York and in the Upper East Side, whom I'm familiar with, they're just simply a flag outside the building. It's a flag that it has the Apple logo.
Show some of the historic buildings so they can see the signage that's on those. Just as an example.
Oops.
Go back. So,
Actually,
logo's right there. Can you see it?
Actually, Mike challenged everybody if you could actually see the sign, but he tricked all of us because it's perpendicular on the.
There's a flag above the front door right there, and the logo on the flag, and that's it. That's the only signage in the building.
Yeah, and while we're having this image on the screen, this also shows the quality and the sensitivity of our client, respecting the historic fabric, which is, as you see in this particular example, and allowing really the quality and the spirit of the building to kind of shine through. So that's what it's more paramount as opposed to any advertisement. So we will be doing exactly the same thing. So what I would like to say is that the signage package will be a whole nother package that will have a whole nother presentation that will be more comprehensive, and we haven't started that yet.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? Okay. So I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that where we are in the Section 106 process, we're now starting to move towards assessing effects of the proposal. What we thought would be a valuable tool to start looking at this is kind of go back and look at summarizing what changes are being proposed under the current concept that Hani has shared with us today. Looking at proposed changes to the historic fabric on the exterior. So we're going to start with the exterior and then make our way in. As Hani mentioned, under this proposal, we're looking at replacement of windows in the north wall with fixed glass. Again, the north wall was where the entrance was first added with UDC. It was altered again in 2000 with a canopy added to the entrance door with the stairs. They're looking at restoring all the exterior stone, restoration of the putty elements, replacement of the severely deteriorated pediments, restoration of first floor windows, removal of the atrium infill and clear story that was added in the early 2000s when the museum was doing their rehab work, and repair of the central skylight. So again, using this image of the photograph, of the existing condition and then what is proposed. So So some of the exterior character defining features that are on, I believe that's on the south elevation, repairing the severely deteriorated pediments. Some of the details under the windows, restoring the first floor windows, removing that clear story and the atrium infill from the early 2000s. Again, the image to the left is showing what that light well looked like prior to that. Repairing the skylights. Then moving towards the interior, alterations or changes under the proposal. The delivery room, removal of the existing ley light, removal of portions of the north wall, the relocation of the clock surround, removal of portions of the north wall of the exhibition room, a restoration of the east and west reading rooms on the first floor, a realignment of the main stair at the basement level, the removal of the conduits and the paint from the Guastavino tile, that always gets me, removal of partitions to reopen the stack room. And again, you're looking at the delivery room looking north, remove that ley light, that's where the proposed new atrium insertion would go. Remove portions of the north wall. They're going to relocate the clock surround within the Carnegie. Up on the second floor, the exhibition room, the proposal is to remove portions of the north wall. And then you, of course, see the image of what's proposed with the atrium. Restore the east and the west reading rooms on the first floor, removing the map room and as well as the theater that was inserted. Heidi mentioned that the grand stair had been reconfigured at some time, so the intent is to return it to its original configuration at the basement level. Again, removing the conduit and the paint from the tile on the basement ceiling. In the stack room, which is again at the north on the first floor, removing of the partitions that were occluding to open up that stack room. Okay. So again, this next component is when we start really talking about these changes and whether or not how they impact the character defining features. Betsy?
If you go back to the list that you started with where everything was listed on the same page before you had all the pictures of each one.
On the interior or the exterior?
The interior.
Okay.
I was really confused by this list because it sounds like some of them are removing things that were done in 2001, and some of them are removing historic things. So I'm wondering if it's possible to separate it into which are adverse effects and which are, sort of restoration to the earlier configuration or something.
I think
I
that's
was confused by
a
that.
great point to separate them out. Okay. And I think the same would go for the exterior. Where is that?
I think it's left and right.
Yeah.
If you look at the pages, what's on the left are potentially adverse and what are on the
Oh,
right are
okay.
problematic.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Question?
I have one more question. This is an exterior question. I guess I should have asked it earlier. On the north side, the side that faces the convention center, that stairway is going to be removed. I'm a little unclear how the access will work. Will the access be then at a lower level, or how will that work if that stair is removed?
The stair would be, so those two legs of stairs would be removed, but the stair will start essentially where essentially this planter ends, and it goes up into like two tiers, like two sets of steps that go up, landing, and then up again. So it would be more frontal as opposed to side.
So then, would anyone who needed to access the building but was unable to use stairs would have to come in from the other side? Is that?
From the south side.
South side?
correct.
Okay.
Honey, since you're up and that slide is there, I was just curious if you could elaborate a little bit in terms of how the existing frames and sashes have been modified. How much is original and how much is?
On the north side, what we intend to do is to essentially have a frame around that opening to emphasize the verticality of this, what the stacks used to be. But we do not intend to have secondary mullions, which is that like a lot of these windows have been severely modified through the evolution of the building. So what we would like to do is have a frame around this opening and maximize the transparency of that that sheet of glass to be able to actually see into that space and into that's the Genius Grove space.
Isn't, you're going to great lengths to restore all of the rest of the windows appropriately. I'm curious, originally these would have had mullions, I'm assuming, that broke them up, perhaps in lines with the floor levels for the stacks?
Right, they used to coincide with the stacks, but our thinking at this point is that because the space is going to be all one space and one height, is to not have those intermediate mullions, but have just a continuous frame.
Okay, I think from a preservation standpoint, that would meet the criteria of adverse effect because it's going to change the character of the building on the north side. It's a really rather unique elevation, as you know, because typically windows weren't that tall and thin on most buildings. So that the importance of trying to explain what they were by incorporating the mullions is something that I think should be considered moving forward.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments or questions at this time? Betsy.
The north facade is the one where I believe you were proposing to cut out another piece to sort of match a cut that was done in 2001, is that right? Well, I guess I just wanted to respond and say, feeling a little squeamish about that. I don't feel enthusiastic about that, but just that's kind of a gut reaction.
Any other questions? Comments? Okay. So kind of where the project is in the process related to its other reviews is actually going to the Commission of Fine Arts tomorrow morning, Thursday, May 18th. It will be reviewed here at the National Capital Planning Commission on June 1st as a concept. We're anticipating having the next Section 106 consulting parties meeting, I really think in late June, early July. We are taking notes of the discussion today, and we will send that to everybody. Hopefully when you came in, there was a sign-in sheet at the reception desk, so make sure we have your contact information. All of the information, the presentation will be uploaded to our website tomorrow, and if you have any, again, we left the comment cards out. If you want to drop something, if not, feel free to email me at lee.webb@ncpc.org. We appreciate your participation today, and we look forward to you attending the next one. And what we'll try to do, our goal is to have the next consulting parties meeting at the library itself. Unfortunately, there was a conflict and we couldn't do it today, but we are looking at dates, and we'll try to make sure there's at least a 2-week lead period before we set that date.